So, Prof Adré, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we go into leadership, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Pretoria. I'm a Afrikaans local boy. Grew up pretty much in the same suburb in the north of Pretoria for the whole of my life. Did my primary school and secondary school there. I was very fortunate as a young child to become sort of recognized as a natural leader, and in the very beginning, and in high school being head boy and chair of the debate committee, sitting on the junior city council, and that sort of prompted me to get a little bit more interested in leadership. And over the years, it just became more and more interesting for me, and realizing that I still don't know a lot. There's still so much to learn.
And what was your dream career as you grew up?
I'm also very fortunate in that sense that my dream career came to me literally at the end of my matric year, that I started discovering the world of marketing and business. Later on, I realized that my grandfather was actually a greengrocer in retail, which means that the DNA of marketing and retail was basically in my bones, and I must have inherited that. So my dream career was to become a consultant / advisor, but there was a teacher in me as well. So my career took a turn to become first a marketing assistant. Then I was a lecturer in marketing, and it came so natural that I swallowed up everything that I could read and that I could use, and that I could share with students. So I progressed very quickly through the different ranks, and I became a professor at the age of 30, and that I thought was a dream career. But in the 3 years that I was then head of department, I probably broke all the rules that one can break in a university as a leader and a manager. Half of them because I didn't know, and half of them because I knew and then would rather ask sorry afterwards. And after those 3 years, I realized that I need to be in business, because my consulting career started whilst I was teaching. And that was the year that I've jumped ship, if I can call it that, back into practice, and it's now 20 years back.
So you've been developing Consulta for 20 years.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a few highlights within those 20 years?
Yeah. It's actually quite interesting. Consulta, in its origin, is actually much older than 20 years. It's now officially 31 years, because I started that in 1988 as a very young lecturer, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed sort of lecturer, wanting to conquer the world. But then I realized as a lecturer, sort of when you sign your employment contract, I realized it's an oath of everlasting poverty. I will never become wealthy, and wealth was never my objective, but working towards getting some sort of a recognition for your hard work. And there was this yearning for something more. So 3 months into being a lecturer, I started Consulta as a close cooperation then with 2 of my friends and colleagues, which then left me for suffering, if I can call it that, in inverted commas. Hindsight, it was good to actually go through that, almost being put into this scenario where I had to make it. So I ran Consulta over many years whilst I was teaching, and it just became so successful that I could not keep on traversing 2 careers, being a lecturer and a consultant in the same time. But I later on learned that many great writers and great authors have followed sort of the same path. Either started as a practitioner, then became academic, or started as an academic, and then later on moved into practice. So my was the latter. I was first an academic up to the age of 33, and then I moved over to Consulta in a full-time capacity, and that's the 20 years that I'm referring to. Great highlights over the years. I think one of the greatest was when I formally found the South African Customer Satisfaction Index. It was a lifelong career dream of mine. And in the mid-90s, before democracy, we were still in a scenario of sanctions. So we could not actually talk to any outside companies in the rest of the world, especially in America. So I made contact with the Americans, the American Customer Satisfaction Index, and initially we could not actually do any business. But as you know, hindsight is now perfect science. The world moved on, and luckily we're beyond that now, beyond 1994, and the world opened up. And in 2012, it took a long time. And then I've actually founded the South African Customer Satisfaction Index. And it's become such a blessing and such a credible and a strong brand that I love every moment of it.
Now, I believe you're benchmarking the customer experience in retail?
As a matter of fact, in all consumer sectors. The American Customer Satisfaction Index license gives us right for the South African market on all consumer goods and services. So it means that we're currently measuring a total of about 16 industries that ranges from mobile services to banking to insurance to medical insurance to retail shopping to retail food, retail clothing, the whole range of it. And the wealth of that metadata and the degree of wisdom that one pick up through just studying those trends is just absolutely immense. And I still am amazed, and every round we learn something new.
So how does the South African customer satisfaction compare to global standards?
It is quite interesting. The South African customer satisfaction, by comparison at a national level, compares within the top 5 of the world. A lot of people really frown when I say that, because you know that sort of that criticism that one has of your own, I think, is a very very specific characteristic of South Africans. We are highly critical of ourselves. And we always think that we have very poor customer service and customer satisfaction. But there's 2 components to this. The one is we have a divided, let's call it a diverse society. We have the society that is coming into the economy, your young black entrepreneurs. That's basically, I believe, it's keeping the economy going currently. That has been excluded from mainstream commerce and business and consumer goods to a large degree, and they were almost used to the scraps. It's sad to say, but that was the experience. So imagine their expectations. They've never had high expectations. Coming into the sort of, let's call it the first world South Africa, their expectations are slow to adapt to higher levels, which means that if a Kentucky Fry and a McDonald's or a Woolworths opens up there, that experience versus their expectations is such a wow that you get an exceeding experience. The perception exceeds their expectation, which is quite unique. That is the one part of the story. The other part of the story is your South Africans that's been privileged for so many years. And as a matter of fact, again, I'm a little ashamed to say that we are very critical. So we would actually take that same Woolworths that my black brothers would appreciate and love, and we would criticize it. The same deliverable, but different expectations.
And what is your sense, how do international visitors rate the South African experience?
They rate that good, but we still don't have a service ethic. That's why if someone asks me, how do we rate, given the model, because the basic foundation of customer satisfaction is you rate the experience relative to the expectation. Otherwise, I cannot compare a Formula One hotel with the Lost City. It's just incomparable. But if I factor into the expectations, then I can compare that. And that's why it's even now comparable across the world. But it doesn't mean that we have a service ethic such as some of the top countries that's actually really, let's take tourism. Your question is about tourism. We still have tourists complaining about slow service, unfriendliness. But that's more on the minority. The remarks that we get is that the average South African is very friendly. We have a unique sense of humor. And obviously they love the treasures of this beautiful country. They love the wildlife, they love the diversity, they love the beauty of our environment. I really believe it's an undiscovered diamond. We can do so much more.
And I believe, Prof, you've also over the years you've been looking at citizen satisfaction.
Yeah, that is my next career dream. I refuse to accept that we have a corrupt government. If you look at some examples of countries that actually literally stood up from the ash and that's actually recovered, it was predominantly because of visionary government leaders that actually said no more, stop this nonsense. And if I can make a small contribution to have an independent, credible metric of public service, that's what we call citizen satisfaction. The model is part of our license agreement, and we are about to actually engage in some high-level talks with government officials on doing this. The idea that we currently have is not to have government sponsor this. The idea is to actually have a private-public partnership. Have private practice and private industry fund this, but public sector benefits from this. Because here's the notion. If you take a town like Pietermaritzburg with all the nonsense that's going on there, if the two large manufacturing entities decides, because of all the corruption and the bribery, to pull up their roots, that town is doomed. So the partnership between commercial and public should be enhanced. And I think for too long, private practice, private industry have stood on the sideline and just criticized government and say, look how corrupt they are, look how bad it is. We should become part of the solution. And I think we've got a new government that can actually do that. My partner in Consulta, majority shareholder, is Bonang Mohale. Recently wrote his book, Lift As You Rise, which is a #1 seller. Bonang is doing very well for him. And he's the CEO of Business Leadership South Africa. That is exactly what I mean. It is a business initiative that is putting a pressure on government to ensure that we get things right. And I'm an optimist. I see some very positive things coming out there. It's painstakingly slow. And that's sad. But some of these things, you have to undo all the corrupt networks that's still, I think, operating under the radar. And it will take time.
Now, Prof, looking at the early days of your career and your life, who inspired you?
There's a saying about leadership that all leaders are readers. So I discovered reading as a child. In those days, it was way before internet. We still had these libraries that were packed into a bus. It was this traveling library, and they would stop at a specific retail shop once a week, and you would have these little library cards. And I can remember you were allowed 2 cards per member. I borrowed my father's, my mother's, and my brother's so that I can actually take out 6 to 8 books a week. And I finished them. So the second thing is, because of my love for reading, I wanted to devour and consume more and more knowledge and more reading. So I taught myself to speed read. So, to your question, who inspired me? I cannot mention one specific name. It is the likes of Peter Senge, Fifth Discipline. So I'm going to quote a lot of authors. Peter Senge's book, Fifth Discipline, probably is my number one book if I would ever be asked what is the number one book. The Learning Organization. I think Peter Senge was ahead of his time many, many years. I need to mention Elijah Goldratt, Dr. Elijah Goldratt, a nuclear physicist with the famous book, The Goal. Profound effect on my career. I need to mention Jim Collins, Good to Great. I need to mention Stephen Covey, which his son I was recently very privileged to meet and do some business with, Stephen M.R. Covey, as part of the Franklin Covey group. Those are just a few names that I've mentioned, but over the years and most recently there's more and more new people coming up that are doing what I really want to do, is to share knowledge. If you just collect knowledge to keep for yourself, it's actually useless, because you need to use that knowledge from the diverse sources that you have and then mold that into something new that you can teach to others. That's that scholarly principle that I picked up in academia and university, is by molding different inputs and sources of information, you can come up with something new. And I'm currently writing my first ever book, and I'm doing exactly that. I'm literally taking all the streams of knowledge and wisdom and information and nuggets of knowledge and molding that into my current passion on customer experience. So I'm hoping to finish that by the middle of the year.
Can you share the title?
Yeah, the title is going to be The Customer Experience Franchise System.
Okay.
And there's a bit of a cheeky paradox in there. Because if you imagine the basic premise of this book is, and it comes from my knowledge and understanding and experience with the Customer Satisfaction Index in South Africa, is that most companies in South Africa still battle with the basics. And the basics are things that you can systemize in a franchise format. If you take Ray Kroc, McDonald's, what made McDonald's famous? The fact that they manufacture a hamburger millions of times a day, exactly the same way. So that, imagine if they allowed every McDonald's restaurant to manufacture a hamburger the way they want to. I want to predict that McDonald's wouldn't have been as big as it is now. So if that could work for retail and for food, why can't we use the business franchise format system, the thinking style about systemizing thinking, to lay down templates and formats of basics of customer service delivery? It is possible. So that's where I'm heading. It's the author that really inspired me was the author of E-Myth Revisited, Michael Gerber. He's an old man now. Old, well, it's a relative term, but he's I think he's in his 70s, if I'm right. But you should see him. Go and Google it. Go on YouTube and check him out. He's still as active as can be, but he only made a big break after 60. And his big break was teaching entrepreneurs this myth of entrepreneurship. So I'm very excited to do that. And to be able to do that, I took a profound decision 3 months ago. My head is still spinning as a result of that. I'm the founder of Consulta, and if ever someone that tells you that a company cannot be felt and seen as the same way as your children, I would beg to differ. So I almost gave birth to it. And 1st of September, I approached my board and I said, we need to transform. and I need to move on. Which means that I want to change the role that I play. So I resigned as CEO. I appointed myself as CVO, Chief Visionary Officer, and we appointed a new black CEO, Bilani Dlamini, and we became a black majority shareholder company with a black CEO, a transformed company, and it gives me the opportunity to not be cornered into the corner office and managing a company, but to be really the visionary leader of the company. And that gives me the sort of, let's call it the airtime and the headspace and the ability to be a player coach rather than a team manager. I hope it comes across as logical, but
It does.
that's pretty much the thinking behind it.
Now, Prof, looking back over your career, was there one major turning point where things could have gone differently,
Yes.
but you took it deliberately in a certain direction?
Yes. It's that, and I'm reading currently a fantastic book by Brené Brown, Dare to Lead. And she's also the author of Vulnerability Leadership. And I think back about this, it was not wisdom at that stage. I think it was that I often say that the line between bravery and stupidity is very, very thin. Luckily, the bravery paid off for me. And that moment I'm referring to is my Tuesday in my life. It was a crossroads day in my career where I was head of department of marketing at University of Pretoria, 3 years in making. And it came to a scenario where the campus approved a business plan to start a campus company. And I sat in Senate meeting. There's 2 Senate meetings in a year. I sat in Senate meeting, and Prof Johan van Zyl, which was the principal of University of Pretoria in those days, approved that business plan without any objection. When I read the business plan, as a matter of fact, I was a co-author of that, I realized that I'm effectively illegal on campus now because I own a consulting company and I had 2 or 3 employees already in service. So here comes the vulnerability, that moment that could have changed so drastically. I wrote 2 letters, 2 documents. The one was my resignation letter and the other one was a business plan. And I made an appointment with the principal, Johan van Zyl, and I said to him, Prof van Zyl, I need to come and see you. The letter that I have in the envelope is my resignation letter, but I will tender that through the normal channels. The other document is a document that I would like to make a proposal to you, given the new campus company. Now, can you imagine that afternoon, 2 o'clock with my meeting? It could have turned 180 degrees other than he did. He could have said to me, we're not interested. Thank you for your service. End of story. But he didn't. He said, we can't lose your expertise and your knowledge. Let's appoint you as an extraordinary professor so that I sit on the advisory committee and you go and do what you are destined to do. Become what you really dream about. But we want a stake in it. So they took a shareholder stake in Consulta, and I became the very first ever company in the Southern Hemisphere that was co-owned by a university.
So would you say courage is a key component of leadership?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm willing to say that it's probably the most important characteristic of leadership is courage. My strategy for Consulta for 2019, any guess what is the topic? Courage. I sat in Seattle coffee shop just now and I was preparing courage mottos. I want everyone in Consulta to read through profound statements about courage and then select one that speaks to them individually. And that becomes their motto for this year. There's so much about courage that we still don't understand. It's the other side of fear, but you cannot have courage without fear. but it's the degree to which there's good balance between it. But there's also vulnerability in it. There's the degree to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't know. Vulnerable enough in saying, I'm sorry. Vulnerable to ask for help. There's so much of it. And the old model of leadership is not that. It was the bastard boss from hell. I'm the CEO, you do as you're told. I've refused to actually follow that leadership model from day one. And I'm lucky to look back at a career that it paid off. It was difficult at some stages because you come with staff that are used to an old managed sort of leader management sort of model rather than a leadership model. And then you apply a leadership model where you actually give people full control. Scariest moment of my career was a strategy session where I've actually literally followed the advice of the book Turn the Ship Around by David Marquet. And he says, give control away. Relinquish control. Now, typical leaders, company leaders, business leaders, I think have a little bit of a control issue, a God complex to some degree. And I say this in a respectful manner. So the moment that you give control away, suddenly your whole foundation is now ripped under you. But the degree to which that was freeing me up, if I look back today in hindsight, it was probably the best ever decision. Did it immediately work? Here's the shocker, it didn't. A lot of people thought that by giving control away, they only took the privileged part of control, the nice part of control, the plus side of control, but not the failure part of it, the not so nice, the struggling part. So I had to teach the guys to actually say control means everything. You own it. If you're the cook in a ship and the kitchen is burning, you're not going to run up to the captain at the top of the bridge and say, Captain, what should I do? The kitchen is burning. You need to put out the fire there because the ship could burn down if you don't take control. It's your ship. It's another great book. It's your ship.
So, Prof, what is driving you today?
Driving me today is to really change South Africa in that custom experience approach. I'm planning to announce some disruptive new ways of doing things. The South Africa that was left, let's call it the post-Zuma era, was a landscape where there was masses of hope, but the scoreboard is not showing up. But I would rather have high hope and low scoreboard than high scoreboard and no hope. Which means that if we can just mold and use that hope that are in the hearts and minds of good South Africans, we can turn this country into one of the most famous examples of success, the Rainbow Nation of Nelson Mandela again. So I'm looking at the next 5 years to become part of a player-coach approach in changing organizations to become legendary in customer experience. You need to walk away from that experience as a customer and say, this is my company now. And you own that brand. You become a brand ambassador, you become a loyalist, you become an apostle, all those models, whatever you want to call it. But the how-to, I think, is still suffering because a lot of leaders don't want to take time to actually go through the basics of getting that discipline because it's a culture. Customer centricity in South Africa is very low. If we can lift the average level of customer centricity of the average South African company, we can actually, really, move mountains. So that's what I'm looking for.
Now, Prof, let's talk about leadership. What does the future of leadership mean to you?
I hope first of all, that it will turn more into the current teachings on courageous leadership, servant leadership, authentic leadership. It moves into a balanced view of leadership and management. There is a notion that people say leadership is better than management. I would like to differ from that and beg to differ. I'm supporting a business model that talks about polarity. And polarity is typically you could have 3 Ps. And I can summarize this as the following. You could have a problem. And what do they say about a problem? A problem must be fixed. So if there's a problem in the business, let's fix that problem. The second one is the aspect of a principle. Now, a principle cannot be fixed. Just think of that. What should you do about a principle? It should be adhered to, and that talks to values. And I think very often companies mistake principles for problems, and problems for principles. Now, management and leadership is exactly that sort of polarity. Principles, you could have opposing principles, but then it must be in a win-win scenario. Let me give you an example. If I have a very progressive view of an open office policy, people can play music, they can dress as they like, they can come and go as they like. There's no specific office hours. There's obviously rules to guide some good discipline. But one of the guys starts to play his music too loudly, and some of the staff members starts to complain about that. And then they go to one of the managers and say, this is a problem. Listen carefully to my choice of words. This is a problem. So how do we handle problems in companies? We fix it by writing a new rule, which means that rule now is no more music. Suddenly you have a loser or losers, and you have winners. Whereas if you could have approached this as a principle and saying, this is actually not about music, it's actually about respect. And if you want to play music, let's do that before 8, and let's use that and integrate that with a whole team and make that a motivational session, and everyone gets inspired and worked up for the day, and then we play music softly. That is a polarity decision, which is a win-win. Management and leadership is in a classic polarity. And I would say the leaders of business that discovers that polarity is going to be leading, and that's a pun intended. And I see more and more leaders that's becoming famous for that sort of characteristic and style of leadership. So it's those things. I think it's courage, it's authenticity, it's being true, it's being having integrity. Say what you do and do what you say. And then I think a fourth one that I think is in the future of leadership is all about trust. If you read Stephen Covey's book, Speed of Trust, you would know that trust is one of those things that if there's no trust in a company, staff distrust the management or the leadership, and vice versa, there's hardly any great opportunity for that company to really reach its potential. They actually call it a trust tax, because with distrust, people are going to make mistakes, which means it will need to be redone. So first of all, it takes longer and it costs more. Whereas if I share what I call smart trust to my staff, and they feel they're empowered, they get that control, and I've given them the competence and the knowledge and the training and the control, the 3 C's, then they will do it right the first time, and they will do it excellently because they will do it in their unique way, which I think is why we need to employ people, not because of their qualifications, but because of their uniqueness. First of all, it's faster and it costs less. So the two comparisons between low trust versus high trust companies are starting to emerge more and more.
And Prof, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
It is almost that saying that I read about one time, is that you get the staff that you deserve. It's the degree to which you keep on listening to your staff, to keep on trusting your employees, to be truly co-owners. Very often it's quite a bit of a platitude where you say, you are owners, we embody ownership in you and we empower you. But it's the degree to which staff really, really believe that. It's the degree to which a staff member in Consulta would say, I would rather say no to a significant pay increase of a headhunter that wants to recruit them, because I love working here. I can be myself. I see the opportunities. I really can see how I can reach my dream instead of going for the short-term lure of salary or money. The best example for me is that we actually have a very high percentage of reappointments of previous resignations. So what happens? Someone resigns because they were lured into more money, bigger salary or whatever, bigger company, international travel, whatever, only to find out they walked into a managed control, old business system. And they had this freedom of empowerment and control. And suddenly they realized that there are more important things in life. Beauty of this is that you start to get like-minded people. Not clones, not drones, like-minded people that think about the same way, but are diverse and unique in every way. And I live for the moment that a young employee gets that. I always say, and I actually have a habit of tapping someone on the shoulder, and I would say to them, the day that it happens, your light came on today. You got it. And I tag them with that and say, you got it today. The light came up and you understand how this works. I think that's the reason why I wake up in the morning, is to impart that knowledge to someone. There's the aha moment and the light comes up.
So would you agree that personal freedom is a very, very important asset?
It is. I had to learn in the, let's call it in a difficult way over the years, that there is no such a thing as freedom without rules. Freedom without rules is anarchy. But if you impart that freedom to the degree that you entrust the intelligence and the humanity of that person, why do I need to formulate a dress code and tell you that's an intelligent person with your own unique clothing preferences? You have to wear a black suit and a white shirt and a red tie. I think it's an insult to your intelligence. Whereas I say to you, dress appropriately to be fit for the occasion when you go to a client. If your client is a high street banking client, an exco that dresses in suits, you dress in a suit. But I don't need to tell you, I don't need to lay down a rule on that. So yes, I think that is the one thing, is personal freedom. But it comes with those 3 C's that I talked about. It's control, it's competence, and it's clarity. To be very clear about this freedom, but give someone the competence and say, okay, for instance, we've actually taken our staff through a course in power dressing. We are not all fashionistas and understanding how to dress. But there's certain things that you can do to just become more effective.
Sure.
And that is the competence part of it. But the control part of it I need to give you and trust you. There comes the trust again. Now you lay down your own dress code. I don't need to formulate a rule for that. Does it mean that Consulta doesn't have any rules? No. There's 2 rules that we have. And I define that as the sort of 4 sides of the sandpit. If I say 4 sides, literally imagine the horizontal and the vertical as two sets of rules. The one rule is external reputation damage. If you willingly did something that would damage the reputation and the good name of Consulta, it's an end of the line. The second one is internal reputation damage. If you talk about people and not to people, I think you're small-minded. You don't fit into the company. So it means that we have these ultimate, we call it the ultimate rules. But you can see that there's no absolute behaviors that you can define it by. And then there's some values that underpin that. So yes, freedom within an environment and a framework.
Now, Prof, when you speak to aspiring leaders, and maybe even your children, what is it you tell them they should focus on for future-proofing their career?
Read. Read a lot. There's so much material available. Read and learn from others. Get yourself those names that you've asked me in the beginning. Who are those, the one person or people that you can model yourself on? I've listened to the newest video of Peter Senge. That's another guy that I really, truly love and follow. Peter Senge of the famous book Start With Why. His newest video I've posted on LinkedIn yesterday. He said there, if you treat your competitors and see them as a competitor, a rival, or a competitor rather than a rival, it's always a finite game. A competitor means there's win-lose. They win, you lose. You win, they lose. Versus, the rival is an infinite game, which means they might be better at certain things that you can learn from. Which means that my focus is not on the competitor, my focus is truly on my customer. So it's putting the focus right. So it's read, finding good role models. I would say even finding yourself a good coach. I would say someone that you really look up to, and say to that person, I want to come and sit at your footsteps and learn from you. Can you help me? Can you coach me? Can you share some of your wisdom? If you take some of the African countries where the African folk that talks about the elders, where the elders would tell the stories. I think it's sad that family fiber is breaking down, and that's not happening enough. So for my children, that's typically we tell stories. This is what happened then. This was the stupid thing that I did, and I've learned through that. And I think maybe a last one is autopsy without blame. Is to always take the past into an autopsy, but with 2 very important provisos. Never blame others and never blame yourself. I've added the second rule recently because I found that a lot of times people, vulnerable, authentic leaders, can be very self-flagellating. They can blame themselves to the degree that they become sick, they become depressed. Fear gets hold of them because they take everything on themselves and they blame themselves. If you blame yourself, you can't learn. There's a neuroscientific principle that blame actually shuts down your hippocampus and certain parts of your brain, your neurophysiology of your brain, which means you can't learn. So it means that if you do an autopsy with blame, you would never learn. So why do the autopsy?
Now, Prof, let's touch on technology. And I believe to a degree Consulta is a technology firm.
Yeah.
What are the key technologies that you would suggest future leaders should learn and master?
I think there's definitely 2. And people would say the one is not technology, but I would disagree. The one is the whole principle of what I call text analytics or speech analytics. It's the degree to which the spoken word, what sets us apart from the animal kingdom is that we have language. And the way that I string along words is actually a mirror of my emotions. The natural language processing science is a hard, well-established science. As a matter of fact, it's possible now. There's no language on the globe, nowhere ever, you can find a language that does not portray emotion. So you can better understand people by just listening better. So I think it's the technology of listening. And the second one, I think, is the technology of, I don't even think it's a right word to call it artificial intelligence, because artificial almost means that it's not, there's something plastic about it. I would rather call it digital artificial intelligence. It's the degree to which there's machine learning that we can actually use to our benefit. Google is a fantastic example of that. And there's more and more companies that's actually investing in that. I started investing in that in my own son. That's a computer scientist, and he came to me about 5 years ago and he said to me, "Dad, I want to do my postgrad in AI. Can you help me?" I said, "Son, I can't. I don't know anything about it. But I do know what I read, that it is most certainly the future." I don't think we should fear it. There's a lot of conspiracy theorists that says ultimately one day artificial intelligence will take over the world and we will become this machine world that will control humans. I don't think so. I don't think so. It's the degree to which there needs to be a symbiosis between the two. But you can see that's quite interesting. If you take text analytics, it's listening to the human that you need to use artificial intelligence to better understand that. It's actually quite sad that we as humans don't understand each other. We need machines to better understand others.
Now, Prof, when it comes to social media, what is it you would tell future leaders? How should they go about building their brand on social media?
I wouldn't say anything different to what we've been talking about. I say you need to be authentic. I think you need to be trusted. You need to stay true to your principles and your values. And you should treat social media connections in the same way that you treat your staff, your children, hopefully in the right way, not in a bad way. Which means that it's an absolute no-no to get involved in a social media squabble and a fight. I think it's childish to do so. If you have a problem with someone, take it offline. Go and see them. As a matter of fact, if there is someone that said something and wrote something and you are really serious about that connection, I would suggest contact that person and say, "Can we have some coffee?
Great idea.
Let's talk about this." But to wash the dirty washing out in the open, because then it becomes sensation. And people just latch onto sensation. I think that's what's currently wrong with Facebook, is the eyeballs are drawn to the sensation. You know, a father that's abusing a child, and people forward that video. What I do nowadays is I unfriend people that do that.
Good.
Now that sounds very, very rough, but I would first say to you, I don't appreciate sending this on. And then people would come back to me and I would message them or inbox them. They would say to me, "But yes, it's important to spread the message." I said, you can spread the message without the sensation and the gore and the bad of it, because it's a real life that's been affected there. And if they don't want to follow that advice, it's better to unfriend them and unfollow them. In business, I think it's not so much different. Social media in a business environment is I see LinkedIn as very, very effective recently, and there's some upcoming platforms that's really starting to work. but it's the degree to which I posted something on LinkedIn this morning and I've asked the question, are you including influencers in your customer journey map? My daughter did a master's in social media recommendation practices. And it's absolutely amazing that you have different categories of recommenders. You have those that would read what others say, but they wouldn't report or respond on it in social media, but they will do it in one-on-one. So it's the social affecting the personal relationships. Whereas you have others that would actually recommend in social media. They become the influencers. And the reason why I say that is because I think the marketing funnel, the old AIDA funnel, attention, interest, desire, action, is now inverted. 2/3 of customers are doing their own online research before they actually even reach out to a company to say, I'm interested in your product. And listen carefully, in the old days it was a company-driven initiative. It was pushing sales. Now it's pulling buyers. So the buyer's got the power and the control. And if you understand that, it's the degree to which someone consistently seeing this company keep to their knitting, keeping to their values, keeping to the way that they do things. And it applies to a business person as well. Keep within your area of expertise, keep on contributing that, complement others that actually contribute to it. Collaborate, and then people that follow you will see that. And very often they would then say, well, that is a company that maybe I can approach for advice, because there's already a trust element that's been established. So yes, I don't think it's the Facebook sort of sensationalist era. I don't like that part of social media. I like the connection and it's the fact that it's flattening borders. The world is now an oyster. I have connections literally in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Indonesia, Philippines. People that would post something that is culturally foreign to me. And I need to read that and try to understand their cultural perspective. And then before I do comment, understand that and develop it.
So, Prof, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
I think it's the employees in Consulta that are the guys that are have taken that decision that I will not fall for the lure of the short-term monetary pull, but I would be true to my heart in terms of following my dreams. So the success stories are those that where I actually have worked with people to just let them believe in themselves. And it's the most profound and fantastic memories that I have of where you can clearly see that athlete that didn't believe in themselves, that human being that didn't believe in themselves, and then slowly but surely starting to get that self-confidence, that self-love, that self-awareness, and then starts to bloom, and they start to bring out their uniqueness. And the number of people that I've been privileged in my life to be leading and mentoring, or some of them are not even in Consulta anymore. My very first employee was a lady with the name Lizanne, and I still refer to her as my sister. Lizanne is one of those, Mother Teresa's in life. But it was over time, and I can remember one day I said to Lizanne, never stop smiling. And that enduring smile, her heart for other people is still living on. And she's now staying in Oudtshoorn, but we're still good friends. There's many of those examples that I can mention. It's on a human level. It's not on a business level. It's not on a qualifications level. It's not on a teaching you how to master a technique level. I think it's more a coach approach than a mentor approach.
And Prof, are there any role models of leadership that you would suggest future leaders should study and maybe learn from?
I'm personally really the upcoming names are most certainly the Peter Senghis of the world. If you want to follow someone that's really breaking new ground, a lot of people think that it's all just glamour, and his social media is exemplary. It's just the way that he's established a following over the number of years since Start With Why. His famous TED Talk that went viral, with such a basic, let's call it simple idea of what, why, and who. And that's where he got to that idea. It starts with why, because starts with why understands your purpose. And purpose-driven leaders are leaders that actually take companies to great heights. Whereas if this is a what-driven leader, it's always a finite game. What did you do to achieve what sort of outcome, what sort of target? Versus purpose is sometimes I could lose to win. And so that's why I love Peter Senghis' work. His new book that is coming out, I think in June, is all about that infinite and finite battle. His most recent work, you can actually see he's working on his book. I'm pretty sure it's already been written, but that is a good one. Brené Brown is another great author that I would say. Now, both those are examples of people that were very strong in their academic roots as well as their practitioner roots. And most certainly he's less active recently is Jim Collins. Jim Collins, also a university professor. And then he was turned a practitioner, and he started teaching those leadership skills in Good to Great. One of the things that when I coach, that I leave with people is that whole principle of retain the core but stimulate progress. It's, and retain the core is your purpose, is your DNA. You shouldn't change that. You cannot negotiate with your values and your core and your DNA. That needs to be always the true values and DNA. But you need to stimulate progress. The moment that you mix that up, things are going to go wrong. And again, that's the great Jim Collins. There's many of other learnings, but most certainly those three I would single out.
So, Prof, where can our listeners best follow you, and how should they connect with you?
Most certainly on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile, just search for me, Adré Schreuder on LinkedIn. And I don't approach LinkedIn in the same way as I do Facebook. I would not accept you as a friend on Facebook if I don't believe you're a friend. Even the word says friend. It's not a distant person that's interested in you. Maybe my view on Facebook is a little bit more, it's more personal for me. Whereas on LinkedIn, it's connections. It's the degree to which we can learn from each other, and the degree to which we can really become an interconnected world. I'm in my 5 years looking ahead. The things that I would like to do is I started a blog series on the whole principle of neuroperception, the degree to which what we see is not reality. Because we always look at things through a specific rose-colored spectacles. And the influences that actually influences us. So I wrote the first article last year, and I'm currently in the production of the first edition on a 5 series of that. And I hope that through that I can learn and maybe obviously learn a lot, because I don't have all that knowledge. I need to collect all the knowledge from others and then mold it into something new. But hopefully it can contribute a little bit to others that are connections and that's interested in the same learnings.
And Prof, last but not least, is there that one piece of advice that you would really like to convey to future leaders that they should implement in their own life and in their leadership?
I think it's that Churchill principle, never give up. There's a video that I've recently watched where they've asked the South African Boykie of Tesla, after his third failure. So the journalist asked him, so weren't you at that stage where you said, maybe I'm not going to make it? He actually interrupted the interviewer and said, never. And he said, why? He said, I will never give up. Never give up. Never give up. And it's that courage. It's not a dumb, stupid, relentless courage. It's the degree to which you believe you can make a difference in the world. And he did. He did. And he's doing, and there's many examples. There's Steve Jobs. There's, so many examples. There's Jeff Bezos of Amazon. So they are all people that's examples of never give up. If I'm right, according to my knowledge, Amazon didn't make profit in the first 8 years of their existence. Now imagine being a board, 8 years and running. You come to the board as a CEO and say, sorry guys, no profit. But it will come. Never give up. Steve Jobs being fired by his own company. Never give up. He came back and he built one of the best ever companies and corporations in the world. But he didn't build it on himself. He left a legacy. Apple is still living on. So it's retain the core, but stimulate progress. So he left the core so that stimulate progress will become a natural. Never give up means that you will stimulate progress. You will always try and do it a different way.
Well, Prof, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and reminding us that vulnerability and courage are key components.
Yeah. I think they two sides of the same coin.